Well, hello, everybody. Sorry, I got a little delayed in the chamber. This is coming from Parliament. Amal, have we got you there?
Yes, hello. Hi, David.
Yeah. Um, Thanks, everybody, for logging on for this Let's Talk event. I think perhaps we're discussing today a matter that I know is of very deep concern to millions of Australians, and I think there are communities all around the world having the discussion that I think we're about to have, which is what on earth can we do um, to to live up to our legal obligations to prevent a genocide that we can see happening in plain sight in front of us. And the aspect we're looking at today is um, uh, Australia's arms exports and weapons exports to Israel. So thank you for joining. I want to acknowledge that the land that I'm on, the land that this parliament is on, down here in Canberra, is Ngunnawal and Ngambri land, and pay our collective respects to First Nations elders past, present, and emerging. And I think some people perhaps don't realise this, but in fact, the parliament was built on a sacred women's meeting site, and there was objection to the destruction and the construction of this site from Ngunnawal and Ngambri women. And they said this place should be a place where women come together, and it's a sacred women's meeting site. And as I look across the parliament and I think about the violence that largely male-dominated institutions like parliament and defence forces have delivered across the world, it reminds me at moments like this that this was actually a sacred meeting place for women, for Ngambri and Ngunnawal peoples, and all across this country. There's this deep history and a continuing culture that we should acknowledge. We're very lucky to have Amal Naser join us today as part of this discussion. Amal, I might let you introduce yourself briefly now, if that's okay.
Thank you. Thank you, David, for that. My name's Amal. I'm a Palestinian organizer and activist based on Bidjigal country. And I'd obviously like to acknowledge that I'm coming from unceded Bidjigal country. That sovereignty was never ceded. And today we're obviously talking about military exports and a very violent system which is being produced on stolen land. And of course, when we look at military exports and weapons, we obviously also need to look at the weapons used introspectively against First Nations people on this continent very violently. So I organize with Palestine Action Group and with Hirak. And very, very fortunate for the invite today, David. So thank you.
Yeah, and if you've had the fortune to be in Sydney and be part of those extraordinary rallies where tens of thousands of people from all across all walks of life, all ages, have come together in Hyde Park in Sydney and expressed solidarity with Palestinian people and a growing anger with our government. If you've had the opportunity to take part in that solidarity action, then you can thank Amal and her many friends and colleagues for their organising work. And on behalf of myself and the Greens, Amal, thank you so much for all that organising work you've been doing.
Thank
really,
you.
really inspiring.
Definitely a collective effort. And thank you for everyone who's made our movement so big and for coming to our rallies week in and week out.
All right. So I think what we wanted to do in this was have a hopefully moderately brief presentation from myself, then perhaps a little bit longer, but presentation from Amal, and then we will go straight to a Q&A and hopefully have enough time for Q&A. We've got until 7:30, all the Senate gods willing, which I think they should be quiet for the next hour. That's my plan. I won't have to run out and vote. But I think the first thing we could say when it comes to weapons exports, and this applies in part to weapons imports, but particularly when it comes to weapons exports from Australia, we have one of the most opaque, non-transparent systems on the planet. And it seems bizarre to say this in a world where we see so much militarism from the United States, and we have so much quite genuine anxiety about the way in which the United States operates. that in fact the United States government has vastly more transparency on its international weapons sales and international weapons deals than Australia does. As the Australian Greens defence spokesperson, I have both defence and justice for the Australian Greens. We find out about Australia's weapons purchases, whether it's a bunch of Tomahawk missiles, maybe some nuclear submarines, or a bunch of F-35 fighter jets. We find out about that not through anything that comes to us as parliamentarians or to the public by way of notices from our government, but from disclosures that are made to the US Congress by the US executive, by the US government. That's how we find out about the weapons we're buying, or the great bulk of weapons we're buying. But when it comes to weapons exports, for policy reasons, not actually for legal reasons, but for policy reasons, for the last 2 decades, the Australian government under both Labor and the Coalition have refused to publish any details about weapons exports, have refused to publish any details about who we sell weapons to, what those weapons are, and how much was paid for those weapons, which I find utterly remarkable. But I'll just say some things we do know. We do know that in the last 5 years, more than 350 weapons exports have been, weapons export permits have been agreed to sell weapons or material that could be used for weapons or a part of weapons to the state of Israel. And that hasn't slowed down in any way. There's been 50 in just the last 12 months that have been, or in the last calendar year, that were granted in relation to the state of Israel. And it's not just Israel. It turns out that Australia is willing to sell weapons to pretty much any regime around the world. We've sold, granted dozens and dozens of weapons exports to the United Arab Emirates, to Saudi Arabia. They are currently engaged in have for the bulk of the last decade been engaged in one of the most brutal, appalling human rights abusing conflicts in Yemen. Yet we're happy to arm and provide heaven knows how many weapons to Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. There was a period of about 4 years between 2016 and 2020 when Australia was exporting weapons to both sides of the conflict in Sudan, providing weapons to both South Sudan and the Sudanese government at a time when there was, some of the most appalling human rights abuses in the conflict between those two countries. We're literally arming both sides. The only reason we know about the identity and the numbers is because we have pressed for and demanded those answers in budget estimate sessions. It's not proactively provided by the government at any point. It's only forced out of them through budget estimate sessions. And then when we seek some further detail, once we get the numbers, for example, when we found out supplying both sides of the conflict in Sudan, classic amoral global weapons dealing behavior. When we asked for details, we were told, actually, no, that's all subject to privacy and national security information, and we can't give you any details about what the weapons were. What on earth our national security that is harmed in actually explaining what would have been sent to those two countries, I can't understand. Perhaps it's the national security interest is that it's deeply, deeply embarrassing to Australia to be seen to be acting like this. There is, however, a pool of data, of government data, that gives some insight into weapons and ammunitions and arms exports. And that's a monthly table produced by the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. They have a kind of trade sales, global sales tally. It's wheat and wool and iron ore and uranium, but they have another category for arms and ammunition. And we know from those DFAT figures that in the 5 years, Australia has sold some $13 million worth of arms and ammunition directly to Israel. That's from the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade's own figures. And indeed, the most recent figures that were released only in the last month or so, about October, sales in October of last year show a continuing set of sales under DFAT figures of arms and ammunition to Israel. So we know that. So more than 350 weapons export permits granted. DFAT's data showing millions and millions of dollars of sales. So then when we ask the foreign minister, well, what have been the weapons that have been sold to Israel, and will you agree to not sell any weapons to Israel? Astoundingly, we get this kind of gaslighting response from Foreign Minister Penny Wong, where she says, no, Australia hasn't sold any weapons to Israel. We won't sell any weapons. We haven't sold any weapons for the last 5 years, and we won't sell any weapons going forward. We point out the DFAT figures, and she goes, oh, wrong. We point out the weapons export data numbers and the permits, and she basically says, no, none of them were weapons. They're all tennis rackets, and none of them could possibly be used, can't be classified as weapons. This is a terrible scare campaign. How could possibly anybody be saying this? How could you be using DFAT's own data to make this case? How could you be using all these weapons permits to make the case? All untrue. But the unfortunate fact for the foreign minister is that all the corporations that have been so keen have been actually exporting all these weapons and weapon systems and the like. And at different times, the Department of Defence itself, up until this most appalling conflict started, they were all really keen to tell the world about their deals, about the contracts they had with Israeli weapons manufacturers, about the export opportunities they were having. We had government ministers go to defence export facilities here saying, this is amazing, we're producing those weapons and we're giving them to Israel. And that was all the way through, including and up for the great bulk of last year, constant notifications about what the weapons sales were. So what has corporate Australia been saying? Sometimes, in a press release where you see a photo of one of these corporate entities with a former coalition minister, maybe Christopher Pyne, or maybe Richard Marles, or maybe who's the current defence minister, celebrating all these weapons export permits. And what does the disclosures from corporate Australia show us? Well, why don't we start with one of them? Currawong Engineering is a Tasmanian-based company. It creates this thing called this Corvette 29 engine, which is based on Israeli-made Blueboard Aerosystems Thunder B drone. And we know that they're selling them into Israel and are being used by the Israeli Defence Forces. Bisalloy Steel, which is a steel corporation manufacturer in the Illawarra, just south of Sydney. They have made repeated public statements, press releases that they've championed out about the deals they have with Israeli arms manufacturer Rafael. And Rafael Defence Systems makes armoured personnel vehicles, armoured fighting vehicles, and the like for the Israeli Defence Force. And Rafael has also put out releases about how they partner with Bisalloy metals, Bisalloy steels in Australia to get this particularly high-grade armoured steel from Bisalloy Steel, and they use it on weapons that they provide, on these armoured fighting vehicles and tanks that they provide to the Israeli Defence Force, and also that they export around the rest of the world. Celebrate it. The contract is on foot. They've been doing it since 2017. They keep pumping out the steel, keep exporting it to Israel, and yet we have Foreign Minister Penny Wong saying, no weapons, no sales. I mean, it's like being gaslighted by our own government. Bisalloy also trumpeted publicly the ongoing contract they have with another Israeli manufacturer called Plasan Rim. It's a manufacturer in the north of Israel, and it manufactures smaller armoured fighting vehicles, more like a sort of Humvee size or an armoured Hilux sort of size, Toyota Hilux size. And Bisalloy has been trumpeting how they have this ongoing contract. They provide the armour to Plasan, and Plasan, of course, on its website, repeatedly celebrates the fact that they supply these armoured vehicles to the Israeli Defence Force for its use in Gaza and in the West Bank, to the Israeli police, which they use in the West Bank, and then I think perhaps even more disturbing, I don't know, it's hard to get grades of disturbing in this space, but also to the militia for settler communities, the armed militia of settler communities in the West Bank, where they're a key way in which Palestinian land is taken, Palestinian people are oppressed, and the ongoing illegal settlements in the West Bank. That's peace harrowing. That's what they say. That's their contractual exposure. We have other key ways in which Australia supports the Israeli arms industry, and there is a longer list than this, and I could go through about individual contracts and weapon sales. But I'll stop on the individual contract sales. But there's one other aspect that I think we really want to highlight. Straight after, within days of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the Australian government came out and condemned the invasion, and they were right to do so. And everyone was mortified that this invasion was happening. The international, rule-based order was being abused. The people of Ukraine were facing this invasion, and within days, Australia put an urgent ban, a prohibition on the export of aluminium, including bauxite and aluminium ores, to Russia, because aluminium is an essential component in pretty much every element of the arms manufacturer, but particularly in ammunition. Wars chew through heaps of ammunition, and without a massive and continuing supply of aluminium, it's pretty impossible to produce the amount of ammunition to keep a war going. So straight away, Australia put a ban on exports of aluminium to Russia. But of course now, with this, we're months and months into the conflict and the invasion of Gaza, and actually if you look at the data, Australia continues to be perhaps one of the most significant suppliers of aluminium to Israel, primarily to their arms industry. Since 2017, Australia has exported some $60 million worth of aluminium and bauxite ore to Israel, and we continue to be a core supplier. Literally, without Australia's aluminium, it's hard to see how the Israeli arms manufacturing could go at the pace it does. And if you really want to be disturbed and you want to have your own additional research into this, you can see the way in which Israeli arms manufacturers are basically celebrating what's happening at the moment, talking about the commercial gains they're getting. Elbit Defense Systems, on their website prominently is talking about pretty much unprecedented demand for what they call components. They actually mean weapons that are being used by the Israeli Defense Force in the ongoing war in Gaza. And of course, this is about exports. Australia has also imported and assigned contracts for some additional $300 million of Israeli-made weapons just since the Albanese government came in 2022. And they have not changed their practice at all since October. They've signed another $18 million of contracts to buy additional Israeli-made weapons since the conflict started in October. And some of those contracts, those $300 million worth of contracts, are for some of the most appalling weapons you could imagine, including the Spike missile produced by Rafael Systems. The Spike missile is sold around the world as having been tested. What that actually means is it's been tested on Palestinians in Gaza. The Spike missile is designed to puncture through a concrete wall of an apartment block, and once it punctures through the wall, to release an appalling spray of shrapnel and fragments, kill everybody inside rooms once it's punctured through the wall. Rather than be offended by that and appalled by that, Australia has signed contracts to manufacture those as joint operations with Rafael Systems, and has indeed signed contracts for additional of those weapons since October of last year. You could not. It's inconceivable that we are helping to fund that industry, given what it's doing at the moment. So the reality and the rhetoric from the Albanese government are so far apart, it's really hard to comprehend. I feel like we're living in Orwellian times where war is peace, freedom is slavery, and the weapons are tennis rackets. What do we do with a government that's willing to lie to us in this way? What do we do with a government that seems to have so much lost its moral compass that it's willing to continue this? I don't know. That's probably what we'll discuss in Q&A. It's probably something that Amal will give us a good steer on. Thanks, Amal.
Thank you for the comprehensive presentation, David. And yeah, it is very outrageous, but in so many elements, Australia is providing active military support to Israel during an ongoing genocide, but even before, a state that has obviously been committing various crimes against humanity. And I guess for a lot of people, there are questions as to how we need to advocate for the end of military exports and what are Australia's obligations. And of course, what I want to talk to everyone about today is obviously the legal, moral, and political obligations that the state has in terms of military exports. And I'll start off with legal and then move on to moral and political. And this is really a really important framework when it comes to advocating against Australian militarism, not just in the context of Israel, of course, but as David touched on, in the context of Sudan, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Indonesia, and so many countries around the world who are complicit in various crimes against humanity and war crimes. So our legal obligations are quite long, but there are a lot of loopholes that Australia likes to use to try to avoid them. A really major aspect is that Australia actually ratified the Arms Trade Treaty in 2014. And under this treaty, particularly Article 7 of this treaty, any export, military export that a country makes, including parts of weapons, so not just necessarily the whole of weapons, the government must consider in every scenario when they export a weapon or an arm as to whether it would contribute to or undermine peace of security and significantly could be used to commit or facilitate serious violations of international humanitarian law or international human rights law. And it also must take into account the risk of arms being used to commit serious acts of gender-based violence or violence against women and children. And of course, in the context of Gaza, we are seeing very serious violations of international humanitarian law. We are seeing collective punishment, war crimes, the bombing of hospitals and refugee camps and schools. These are all war crimes and violations of international humanitarian law. And this is something that our government has conceded to, of course, not explicitly, but at least implicitly, with the foreign minister noting that Israel is a democracy and it is held to a higher standard, and they must also abide by international law, and they'll be using diplomatic avenues to advocate for international law being abided by, which is a major indication that the Australian government is presently of the view that international humanitarian law is being violated. But of course, we know that even if the Australian government didn't accept that, we know international law is being violated as a fact. On top of that, the war on Gaza is a war on women and children. 50% of the population of Gaza is children. 70% of people who have been murdered in Gaza are women and children, with over 13,000 children being killed since the start of the conflict on October 7. So what we know is that if Australia is actively sending military exports to Israel, there is a major risk that Australia is in violation of its obligations under Article 7. This is not just post-October 7, which Penny Wong will maybe use to try to avoid it, but it is even pre-then. We saw violations in the past 5 years where, as noted before by David, we've sold over $13 million in arms to Israel. In 2021, we saw violations of international humanitarian law during the carpet bombing of the Gaza Strip. We've seen violations of international humanitarian law through settler militias and their attacks of the Palestinian people in the occupied West Bank, in the attacks of refugee camps in Jenin, and so on and so forth. So violations of international humanitarian law are certainly not limited to post-October 7, and it is quite clear Australia has violated its obligations to an arms trade treaty that it has signed and it has become a signatory to. However, and very significantly, Australia has done something very serious to avoid accountability. So in 2013, when the arms trade treaty was being negotiated, and it had finally been negotiated and released for signing, Amnesty noted that in order for the arms trade treaty to be effective in any way or form, states must agree to an annual reporting system to promote accountability. And this is because states must be able to scrutinize one another as to how they are selling the arms. And a violation of the arms trade treaty can lead to Australia being scrutinized within the ICJ's jurisdiction. So a state can take Australia for courts for violation of the arms trade treaty. However, at present, this is almost impossible because Australia did not do what Amnesty requested, which is agreeing to an annual reporting system, but rather Australia, as David mentioned earlier, has the least transparent arms export system in the Western world. And this prevents itself from being held into account. And this is really significant because we do talk about the important, the work that Senator Shoebridge and his office have done has involved extensive research and journalists also doing extensive research to find out any potential links to Israel. If we just had a transparent system, which we do have, which we should, and we should have obligations to do that, we wouldn't need to do all this unpicking. We would have information from the Australian government as to where our arms are being exported to. And the United States, who is renowned for violating international human rights law on every level possible, has a much more transparent system than Australia, and that is quite significant within itself. So it's really important that in our advocacy, we don't just advocate for Australia to no longer send military exports to Israel, which, as Senator Shoebridge noted earlier, they've been avoiding that by saying we don't give anything to Israel, but we should be advocating for a more transparent system so it becomes more easy to not just scrutinize them on a political level, but on a legal level as well, bringing in violations of treaties that they are signatories to and have ratified. Now, the more significant aspect of that, so this was always a legal obligation from day one, has been for the past 5 years. However, in this present context, there's even a more significant legal obligation, which is the very fact that supplying arms to a country who is engaging in genocide is a crime of complicity. And this isn't speculation. This isn't what academic scholarship has noted. This was noted itself by the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda, which was obviously founded to investigate and prosecute the crime of genocide in Rwanda. And they explicitly linked weapons. Weapons to genocide, stating that a state actor may be complicit in genocide by procuring means such as weapons, instruments, or any other means used to commit genocide, with the accomplice knowing that such means would be used for such purpose. Very wordy sentence. But basically what this means is that if the Australian government is aware that a state is engaging in a genocidal campaign, and they then provide arms to this state, they can be charged as an accomplice in genocide. Now, of course, this is significant because the ICJ has since come out 2 weeks ago and noted that there is a plausible risk of genocide. At this point, Australia and Western countries around the world have been put on notice. There is a plausible risk that Israel is engaging in genocide. And the preliminary measures did not just mean that Israel itself must do whatever it can to not engage in genocide, but state actors around the world must also do everything in their power to prevent a genocide. And in the case of Australia, this is ending military exports. If we have been sending, as suspected, military weapons and equipment to Israel in the aftermath of October 7, we are very likely complicit in a genocide. And this is something that Australia could be prosecuted for in the future if we had a transparent system where there was heaps of evidence to show that, but indeed investigative work and research has already been able to uncover that. So it's really imperative that the Australian government respect ICJ findings and respect the international rule-based order that they only seem to hypocritically follow when it is within their foreign interests to do so. They're very capable of following ICJ decisions when it comes to the war on Ukraine, because Russia is not an ally and it is within their own foreign geopolitical interests. But they should be also respecting international law and their obligations under international law, even when it comes to a supposed ally. However, as noted, there are a lot of limitations and loopholes when it comes to international law. Today in the Senate, we saw our senators pushing those loopholes, especially within the Labor government, as much as possible. I was in Canberra earlier today, somehow in Sydney now because I time traveled, and it was absolutely outrageous seeing senators claim, but they didn't have obligations under the ICJ, misappropriating what the ICJ decision was, claiming that it was all to do with Israel had a right to defend itself. That's what the ICJ decided, when in no point did the ICJ make any declaration of the sort. But on top of that, international law, even on on a more critical level, international law has been interpreted and read and designed to protect Western state actors within the global north and their geopolitical interests. We've seen that time and time again. We've seen in the way that international law has been designed to protect countries like the United States and Australia, Canada, and the UK in colonial missions and imperialist missions, which has led to the massacres of thousands. Indeed, when it came to the war on Iraq, international law was weaponized to justify the war in Iraq, which eventually murdered over 1 million civilians. I remind everyone, this was in early 2003, and it was this idea that there was a right to self-defense that was not just put forward by politicians, but international law scholars as well, to justify the illegal, which we now commonly know as the illegal invasion of Iraq. So trying to argue on the international law level, whilst it's very effective and useful, we need to understand its limitations and the fact that loopholes within international law are actively being weaponized by countries within the global north to prevent any form of accountability and to negate any complicity in the current genocide. So we have to bring it down to a human level. We have to bring it down to a moral and ethical level. Let's just say Australia didn't sign the Arms Trade Treaty, or it wasn't a signatory to the Genocide Convention. This does not mean there is no moral case not to provide military weapons to a country who is engaging in genocide. So, for example, let's talk about the drones that are being provided to Israel. For example, we are talking about Palestinians who are on the ground, who every waking moment they are hearing the buzzing of these drones that is surveilling their people, murdering their people, traumatizing them on every level. And these drones are Australian made and exported. When it comes to F-35 planes, the door where the bomb is being unleashed is Australian made and exported. Australia's very name is on the very weapons that are killing Palestinian people, that are protecting Israeli settler militars and military, and are being actively encountered by Palestinians who are so deeply traumatized by this war. There is no moral case for war. There is no moral case for the murder of over 25,000 people, including women and children. And because of that, we have to push our government that we do not morally stand with military weapons being sent to countries violating not just international law, but just violating basic principles of humanity and dignity. The Palestinian people are human too, and they deserve to live and breathe the way that Israeli life has been treated as sacred. Palestinians deserve that too. And we really need to reevaluate our government's gross immorality towards people that live in the global south. Because if it was Israeli hospitals that were being bombed, if Hamas tunnels were supposedly under Israeli hospitals, there would never be a justification for the bombing of Israeli hospitals with Israeli civilians in it. And that is because simply Israeli lives have been treated as more important than Palestinian lives. And we must dictate that that is unacceptable. Indigenous lives are just as important as white lives per se. And it is important that the global south are treated as human too, that life is respected, and that our life is treated as sacred too. And we are not just continuously murdered for the geopolitical interests and the greed of the global north. It's absolutely ludicrous that we live in a day and age where these murders continue to be justified, but that our taxpayer dollars and our government is actively sending weapons that are murdering people within the global south. It's just something that can no longer be justified, and it's an important moral claim to make when Australia tries to negate any legal responsibility that it has. But finally, there is also a political responsibility here. After refusing to support ICJ hearings, the Albanese government did maintain a sense of neutrality when it came to the ICJ. They certainly didn't come out in support of it, but unlike the UK and the US and Canada, they didn't, strongly suggest that it shouldn't have happened. They said, they support the right for ICJ hearings to happen. They're not a party to it. And they noted that they don't think the ICJ would be useful. And this conflict is best left to be resolved politically. Okay, so we need to tell Albanese how to do that. If he thinks that this conflict is best to be resolved politically, then he needs to be doing his job, because he's currently not doing that. They're currently not resolving this conflict politically. If you want to politically resolve a conflict, we need to look at the way conflicts have been resolved in the past. How was apartheid dismantled in South Africa? It wasn't with our prime ministers at the time going in and shaking the hands of apartheid leaders in South Africa and having coffee with them, wining and dining with them, shaking their hands, smiling and taking photos with people who are making genocidal remarks, with people who were advocating for apartheid. It was made by withdrawing diplomatic support, by boycotting, by no longer engaging with these countries and isolating them on every potential stage possible. That is how it was achieved. Our current government, Penny Wong, recently visited Israel. She shook hands with Isaac Hezbollah. I don't even want to know how to say his name because I don't care. Who has made active genocidal remarks against the Palestinian people. Who is a man who, in the aftermath of the ICJ, said he doesn't care. He doesn't care what the ICJ said. He doesn't care what the decision is. They'll continue to do what they want to do, which is to eradicate the Palestinian people. They don't care if Australia. They don't care about listening to Australia if Australia comes and smiles at them, but continues to provide them weapons, continues to provide them diplomatic support. They will start to care if Australia didn't take such a soft and toothless approach. If Australia imposed an arms embargo on Israel, if Australia withdrew diplomatic support, if Australia started sanctioning Israeli leaders and isolating them from the world stage. These are proven political tactics that work from the government. And in no conflict in history has soft and toothless approaches managed to shift a fascist government from achieving what it wants. If they can maintain their relationships, if they can maintain funding from the US, if they can maintain support from Australia, Israel is going to continue doing what it does. No matter if Penny Wong smiles, shakes their hand and say, hey, you should probably stop violating international law, because they don't care. They really don't care. So this is why these are so just to summarize all of that, we have obviously our legal arguments and our legal claims, which our government has rejected. They have any legal obligation whatsoever. We have a moral claim, which our government has shown that they absolutely have incredibly have dehumanized the Palestinian people, and do not and probably understand they have a moral cause but do not care. And obviously the political case, which is something the government acknowledges is a way forward to resolve this conflict, but have done nothing political that will actually resolve this conflict. And I guess a major aspect of all of this is we need to ask why. Why has the Australian Labor government, who's led by Albanese, who historically has been a bit minorly supportive of the Palestinian people, who certainly hasn't been headstrong at the forefront like members of the Greens. But why is it that this government is so stubborn as to their support of Israel? And it has a lot to do with AUKUS and the AUKUS alliance and our ties to the US. And for those who don't know what AUKUS is, it's a military alliance that we formed with the UK and the US to help build nuclear submarines. And I'm going to pass it off to David to talk more about AUKUS, because he's very passionate about this. So he's better to speak about it.
Thanks so much, Amal. I feel like I joined some dots then too about the legal situation and some of those international legal obligations that our government holds. And thanks for the forensic work on that, Amal. I really appreciate it. Well, so why is the Albanese Labor government adopting a policy that in substance would be identical to what the coalition, a Morrison coalition or a Dutton coalition government is delivering in relation to this conflict? Why? I think it comes back to the US alliance, and the current cornerstone of the US alliance is twofold. There's the ANZUS Treaty, which was signed in the 1950 or so, where there's an obligation that the United States has to consult with Australia if we get attacked. And Australia has been, ever since the signing of that treaty, so desperate to be a little loyal ally of the United States, so that if ever we do get attacked, there's some kind of commitment that the US will come riding in to save us. There's that. But more recently, it's seen in the context of AUKUS. And AUKUS is just one of the ways you could arrange the acronyms for Australia, the United Kingdom, and the US. There's Sucker as well as another way if you wanted to arrange the acronyms. The list, but AUKUS is the one that they use. And AUKUS is there's like three elements to AUKUS. The first is a political arrangement between literally the United Kingdom, the United States, and Australia, designed to show a kind of unity between those three Anglo-Western countries, as they would perceive themselves to be, largely against China. It's a political statement against China, a military political statement against China. That's the first part of it, a political military statement. The second part is an agreement for Australia to get nuclear submarines from the United States and then co-produce the United Kingdom. And that's an insane proposal that we spent at least $268 to get nuclear submarines. And that is utterly dependent on the goodwill of the United States. The UK is a bit player in that. It's utterly dependent on the United States' goodwill. And the third part of AUKUS is an enmeshing of our defence forces and our science with the United States and the UK to produce some kind of tripartite bubble where we share weapons technology between us. They're the three key elements of AUKUS. But that was obviously a deal negotiated by Morrison, signed on by his government, coalition government, and then uncritically accepted by Albanese when he was opposition leader. And bizarrely, it was accepted by Albanese with documents without any written briefing. He had a 2-hour oral briefing from Morrison, the then defence minister, people with braids on their shoulders from the ADF. 2-hour oral briefing, no docs, and he was persuaded to sign AUKUS. He then walked straight from to Labor caucus and got Labor caucus to agree to AUKUS, and it has been attached to this deal. I mean, that's not unusual. Labor has been, particularly Labor right, but now increasingly the left of Labor, are subtly tied to the US alliance. They have not raised a whimper with the signing of AUKUS, not raised a whimper with Australia going down the nuclear path, not raised a whimper when the United States has expanded the range and role of what Pine Gap does as a joint facility between Australia and the United States, but it's really just a United States facility. We know that Pine Gap, for example, is used to target extrajudicial killings, drone killings by the United States. It's probably being used at the moment by the Israeli military to help target some of their assaults in Gaza. And of course, the Albanese government supports the deployment of US B-52 bombers at Tyndall, just south of Darwin. And the Albanese Labor government also supports the pre-positioning of US Marines, so as they can be, pre-positioned for a war with China. And they support the massive expansion of the Stirling submarine base off the coast of Perth to be a forward deployment space for the United States and UK nuclear submarines, to make them more available for a war with China as well. We're literally signing up as a kind of just like a base, a US military base, an extended US military base, where we also supply a bit of military personnel to project force against China in the South China Sea. And they think that makes us safe. It so does not make us safe. It's such a dangerous geopolitical play. But to keep that on track requires US goodwill. US goodwill requires that whichever war the US supports or goes into, we loyally follow along without any questions. The US, of course, is unambiguously supporting what's happening in Gaza and the continuing to supply the Israeli Defense Forces with whatever weapons they want or need. And in that context, Foreign Minister Wong, Prime Minister Albanese are not going to rock the boat. They're going to support it. They're going to do whatever they can to be a loyal ally of the United States so that hopefully the AUKUS submarine deal stays on track. It's kind of depressing, I think, Amal.
Thank you for that.
You're on mute.
Thank you for that, Dave. Yeah, absolutely. Even before AUKUS, of course, our foreign policy wasn't perfect, but this certainly has exacerbated any ability for us to have independent foreign policy. And Paul Keating, for all his flaws, made that point very clear in his attack of AUKUS last year, which is probably some of my favorite things to watch. So yeah, I think it's definitely so important that we target militarism at this country to its core in order to be able to exercise any form of foreign policy that is truly democratic and truly respects the wishes of the people on the ground. So I'll wrap it up there, and I think we'll start opening it up for questions.
Okay, so look, we've got a bunch of questions in the chat, and I think that's probably going to be the most efficient way that we can do it, although I see a couple of hands up. Why don't we try going to the hands up first and see if we can unmute Nico.
Hi, yeah. I put my question in the chat. I'd like to ask, with actions to prevent exports or to dissuade exports, would complicity be regarded as a threat to national security, and therefore actions to prevent arms exports to Israel could be regarded as protective of national security? I'm just wondering what kind of defences people have who've engaged in direct action.
Amal, do you want to have a go at that? Is seeking to prevent a genocide a defence if you get whacked for civil disobedience?
Interesting. Maybe we can test that in court. I don't think so. Just based, I personally find the court in the question of protest to be quite conservative. And they're very, very, and usually to make that claim, you would have to prove there's a genocide and all the sorts. But I find the court to be quite conservative when it comes to protest, because they'll say, well, if you can, protest on a footpath, then you don't need to be doing this, which is the unfortunate reality of things. But I think what it should become is a stronger claim to give workers more autonomy to be able to engage in the withdrawal of their labour and such, which at the moment is obviously a violation of so many industrial laws. But yes, I say the reality is no. The law
there's the doctrine of necessity too. That requires a very direct link between your action and whatever harm you're seeking to avoid. So, for example, if you see a child on the road and there's a car coming towards them, you can breach the road regulations by running in front of a car and grabbing the child and not be prosecuted for breaching road regulations if you're saving a child. But it requires that kind of extreme connection normally by the courts. And I think Amal's analysis is probably right. Lynn? I'm going to go Lynn, Ismet, then Rhonda. So we'll try and work through some questions.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for those presentations. I was just wondering, in the light of, the hypocrisy in terms of our attitude about Russia and Ukraine, China, and then Israel. Can you hear me? Whether or not there's something to be gained from drawing attention to the fact that Israel exports weapons and cybersecurity systems to both Russia and China. We know that Israel is among the top 10 weapons dealers in the world, and I'm not sure that a lot of people are aware of that, and that in 2001 its arms sales reached $11.3 billion.
Lynn, well, I mean, I think we have very few ethical constraints on our, we're meant to. The defence export regs say that we should have ethical constraints, and Amal dealt with some of those. But the practice is, if it's completely secret, then you question whether or not there are really any ethical constraints on our defence exports. But I'm not familiar if there are any legal constraints on Israel's defence exports, but they have got a massive export industry. If you read Anthony Lowenstein's book, you'll see that they actively promote the experimentation on the Palestinian people as a sales pitch for their weapons. And we don't have to look to Russia or China for troubling defence exports. Elbit Systems, which is a Israeli defence contractor that the Albanese government has signed fresh contracts with, the Australian Defence Force removed a whole bunch of their equipment from Australian military vehicles and Australian military installations because Elbit Systems had a kind of secret, covert bugging capacity on the systems that they put in place, and at significant cost. And we're talking only in the last 2 years. Australia had to remove all of that Elbit Systems material from Australian Defence Force facilities, and then pretty much straight after they sign a fresh contract with Elbit. Yes, I think there are many troubling aspects to it. Amal, did you want to add anything else? We've got a little bit of delay there with Amal, so I might go to Ismet.
Sorry, I couldn't unmute for a second. But all sorted. I just wanted to add that when we look at when Israel supplies so many weapons to Russia, we can't obviously look at Israel in isolation of obviously empire and the global imperialist project that Israel is so central to, and that's why these analyses are so important. Israel is also deeply complicit in the genocide in Congo right now. On a deep level, he was complicit in apartheid in South Africa as well. I think these are just arguments that we need to make as to the way the global military the military industrial complex and the imperialist complex operates, are not just to benefit Israel, and to also just create this kind of global system of so many gross human rights violations. And that's why we need to target it at its core on a political level.
Yeah, thanks, Amal. And I think, looking at the moment, we're looking at this appalling conflict and the role of the Israeli industries, Australia's defence industries. But, it's a symptom of a much, much bigger global problem fed by the United States, the UK, French, Chinese, Russian military interests. It's a bigger problem, isn't it?
Hi, hello everyone. I hope you hear me. And I want to say to Amal, as a Kurdish Australian, we have so much sympathy at the moment with Palestinian community and what they're going through. And as a Kurdish community, we're going through same pain and same pain. And what my question is going to be to David, as a Armenian community, Kurdish community, and Palestinian community, we all know Australian government sent all these weapons to Turkey, Azerbaijan, and Saudi Arabia, Israel, and the loss of Kurdish children, women are being killed by Australian drone in northern eastern Syria, in Turkey, and also by Turkish government. And this four community can put a joint statement against defense minister, also again foreign minister, how much is going to be effective inside Palestinian community just to by himself, because we have the same issue, we struggle same way, and we're facing same discrimination. And yeah, this is my question. It's really, I think there's a lot of community like us as a
Thanks, Ismet. Well, I mean, I think Amal mentioned it earlier about how it's not. I mean, we're seeing some of the worst, most awful impacts of it here in the Israel-Palestine conflict, but we're wrong to see it as just like a conflict in isolation. The same forces that are willing to do this to the people of Palestine are willing to do it to Kurdish peoples, and have been shown that willingness for decades. And we could point to conflict after conflict around the planet. Amal, what's your thoughts in terms of the solidarity actions and and the connections.
I think solidarity is so crucial in movements like this, because it is the same systems and struggles that are subjugating the Palestinian people, that are subjugating the Kurdish people, and the Syrian, the Armenian people, the Indigenous people in Australia as well, and just all around the globe, the Tamil people, and just so on and so forth. So I think solidarity is so important, because it's, I think, within our shared struggle and our shared values and goals that we can truly unite to unite together with the shared goals of liberation to truly achieve change, particularly diaspora. So I think solidarity is so crucial to our work, but it was also crucial to so many revolutionaries on the ground, like historically. Kurdish Palestinian solidarity has always been something that's so highlighted. So I think it is so imperative and so important. And I think the Kurdish community for their ongoing solidarity as well.
And Ismet, just quickly up, we put a contribution last night in the Senate drawing attention to just a sort of handful of the appalling violence against the Kurdish peoples. We know a lot of that's come at the hands of the Turkish military, with ongoing invasions and bombings and destruction of civilian infrastructure, but also the execution of Kurdish activists by the Iranian government. We put that contribution last night, and we're looking to share it. We'll share it on socials in the next 24 hours.
Thank you.
Ismet, from all of us, solidarity with the struggles of the Kurdish peoples as well.
Also,
I might ask you,
David. We always appreciate having you, David. You've been voice of everyone, I say.
Thanks, Ismet. We do that. We do this work as allies, and that's what I think is powerful about tonight. Pippa and then Rhonda, we might ask you to put the two questions together, because we're running a bit short on time, and then I'll go first to Amal to answer them.
Okay. I just want to ask, are there any decent investigative journalists left in Australia who are prepared to take this on and be able to publish this information in a way that is impossible for anyone to deny?
David, do you want me to just run on? My question is just very quickly, Labor are saying they're going slow. What is the go slow, this go slow? Is that just referring to new contracts, therefore existing contracts continue on unabated? Is that what is actually happening?
Okay. Thank you, Pippa and Rhonda. In terms of investigative journalists, not sure. Anthony Lowenstein is an investigative journalist, and he published the Palestine Laboratory, which was so great and so phenomenal, and a really important read. So I really recommend reading that. I'm not sure how much work Wendy Bacon still does, but she's been really staunch on the question of Palestine, and she's really great. Otherwise, lots of journalists are a bit tied to the situation with their editors, unfortunately. And editors of major newspapers have been, censoring a lot of questions and discussions about Palestine, even though journalists are willing to do the work. They just can't get it past the desk, unfortunately. In terms of your question, Rhonda, and going slow, I think David will be able to speak to that a bit more. But I think it's a bit of a cop-out. The Labor government right now have made it quite clear. They've made it quite clear based on insider information that I've heard that they're very, very terrified of losing the Muslim vote. They think the Greens are lying and manipulating our community and all the sorts, which is a load of crap, considering ever since I've been a Palestine advocate, long before this, I have been advocating for us to no longer vote for Labor. So going slow, in my view, is some diplomatic term that they're trying to use to kind of, balance this fine line that they're treading, which is like really keeping their foreign policy interests close, but really scared of losing power in Parliament because the Muslim community is a major one in Australia and it depends on voting power. And we are historically, at least my community is, our loyal voters to the Labor Party. That's my interpretation of anything the Labor Party says these days, but I'll pass it to David.
Yeah, well, I could just point out, I mean, there are people publishing on this. Often it's very hard to get the stories up in mainstream media. Even when you have journalists who really want to run the story, their editors tend to shut it down. Michael West, if you look at his website, has run a number of these stories, and I'd urge you to have a look at Michael West's website. Also, Kelly Tranter and Declassified, and the Declassified website. I think I put a link to Kelly Tranter's in the chat. She's done some great work, particularly on the F-35, but not limited to the F-35 and Australia's complicity in that. But they're two sort of alternative news sources that are, I think, test their sources thoroughly and I find credible when they put their material forward. Peter Cronau as well has done some work on Declassified. So it's not as though we don't have anyone writing this. There are some other journalists like Paul Gregoire, who writes an ongoing blog, I think is also, clearly putting the case forward. But mainstream media, extremely hard. There are some academics, and we have ongoing conversation with academics. A lot of them are focused on the AUKUS space, but there are some very critical views about the AUKUS space and about Australia's complicity with the United States. We'll put this up on our YouTube site. We'll probably put a link to it on Facebook. And if we can think of any additional authors that we can put in that space, then we will. One of the books that, if you after a bit of light reading, there's a treatise, a fairly short piece on sub-imperial power that I think is an excellent kind of analysis of Australia's sort of deputy sheriff role to the United States and why we adopt it and what we get out of it on a sort of broader role. About initially we were the deputy sheriff to the United Kingdom, then we're the deputy sheriff to the United States, and what the role of a sub-imperial power is. And if people haven't read that, I'd urge them to have a look at that. Thank you, Olivia. Clinton Fernandez, a good read, only 140 odd pages, but a really good analysis. I think Olivia's also coming in here to give me the hurry up because we promised to finish by 7:30. I think the other aspect of the question that was asked by, was it Rhonda? And Rhonda, I've noticed your really powerful work on social media too. Congrats for that work that you do as one of our very hardworking Greens councillors. Rhonda, could you remind me what the second part of your question was? Oh no, it's about the go slow.
Oh yeah,
yeah, the go slow. Yeah, that was one of those examples of, an ABC reporter actually being able to actually run one of the stories, and it kind of puts the lie to Penny Wong's statements, doesn't it? If a whole lot of industry insiders in the defence industry in Australia are complaining about the fact that the Department of Defence and Foreign Affairs and Trade are putting a go slow on processing weapons export permits to Israel, and it's causing them problems. And Israel is cranky about a go slow on weapons export permits to Australia, and they're willing to talk to the ABC and explain why they're cranky about not being able to get the weapons to Israel. It kind of puts the lie, doesn't it, to Penny Wong's argument that we never have and never will supply arguments to Israel. In fact, it's a kind of bullshit indicator in my view. But I would imagine there is strong political pressure inside both defence and inside DFAT to do everything they possibly can to delay and obfuscate, because that's the nature of the beast we're dealing with at the moment, the Albanese government. I would have thought delay and obfuscation is what they're trying to do at the moment, and not be seen, not making a courageous call. And the courageous call is actually just stop it. All right, thanks very much, everybody, for joining in. We had really good take up on this presentation. If you would like to hear more about this, or there's other aspects of conflict and Australia's complicity in it that you think we could usefully provide some evidence on, please let us know. Could I really thank Amal for literally, I think 4 hours ago, I saw Amal just outside the front of Parliament at a rally in Canberra. And I think she's doing this from her home in Sydney. So Amal, thank you so much. And on behalf of all of us.
Thank you. I time traveled.
And I might leave Amal to give some finishing comments and wrap it up.
Like media. Internet
thanks everyone again. I think a bit of a jumpy internet connection from Amal there. Are you? But
Back
thanks
now.
everyone for the interest. There are actions. There are actions. Oh, Amal, we got you back.
Yes, there we go.
Go.
Sorry about that. Yeah, no, thank you for having me. And yeah, as David noted, there are so many actions. Obviously, come to your mass mobilization every Saturday or Sunday. Usually Sunday if you're in Sydney this Sunday, 1:30 with a specific focus on UNRWA and restoring UNRWA this week. And definitely come to those and continue to grow them. I have a green contingent, so you can certainly join those as well if you don't want to come alone. And yeah, and mini actions as well. There might be something in the military export space soon. But yeah, just keep your ear open and follow the relevant pages, and hopefully there'll be something to do. But also, you all have the capacity to organize, so definitely get together and organize something if that's what you would like to contribute to.
Cool. Thanks everyone. Stay safe. Bye.